Thank you, Mary, and hello, everyone. It's lovely to see not so much faces, but names of so many of my colleagues from the English language sector, and also to see your interest in the IEM. So, as has been mentioned earlier by Jim when looking at the IEM roadmap, as part of the application for authorization to use the IEM, providers, ELE providers, will be required to comply with codes of practice. So we're going to look at what the code of practice is, how many codes of practice QQI will develop, and what areas will be assessed as part of the compliance process. So what is the code of practice? Some of you may have seen other examples of the code of practice which were developed earlier during in the previous preparation for the IEM. So let's just have a look at what it is so that everybody is aware. It's a key part of the national strategy to ensure that international learners can expect a high quality educational experience from their initial contact with the provider through to enrolment on and participation in a programme, right up to the completion of their course. It's a set of requirements which providers will be asked to comply with as part of their application for authorisation to use the IEM. The areas of the code are informed by national and international practice, and as with all other areas of the IEM, the focus is ultimately, as we've been saying all along, today, on learner protection. The codes help to assess the learner experience with the provider in terms of the quality and the consistency of the experience throughout. And the aim, as Tanya mentioned earlier, is to strengthen Ireland's reputation internationally for learners, parents, education agents, and all other stakeholders. The 2019 Act allows for different codes of practice, and the policy approaches for the development of two distinct codes, one for higher education and one for English language education. So we're going to be looking at what will be in the codes for English language education today. Which providers may apply? So we mentioned, or Jim mentioned earlier, about the participation of higher education. So just so you're aware of it as well, higher education providers of programs for international learners leading to awards on the NFQ will be applying. Providers of programs to learners outside the state leading to the same awards on the NFQ, and which is more relevant to you, or most relevant to you today, providers of English language programs. Some of you have been asking about different contexts that are, for example, summer centres and so on, which context will be able to or would be best to apply for authorisation to use the IEM? The answer really is every context. Many of you today are providers of general English programmes, study work programmes, examination preparation programmes for specific purposes, for English provision within higher education. There's some of you here today who are in that area of English provision. Junior summer programs, closed groups, face-to-face and online. So we're looking at every single context really where English provision is available. So while it will be essential for providers who work with international adult learners to apply for the IEM, summer centre providers may also apply for the mark. I know that was a question that some of you had sent in to us. So which areas will the codes focus on? These areas that will be assessed will include student recruitment and ethical marketing procedures, organisational structures, for example, the day-to-day administration of your organisation, different areas of the learner experience, for example, accommodation, student welfare, different areas of the staff experience, for example, professional development for teaching staff, professional development for other staff, and the academic structures, so the course programs and the level system. For those of you who are already accredited by ACELS or Equals or both schemes, these areas will be familiar to you as they're all assessed on similar inspection schemes. In some ways, the areas focused on in the codes are similar to the codes of practice for higher education. However, QA for higher education is different, as programs lead to awards on the National Framework of Qualifications, as you said earlier. In the case of English language, programs don't necessarily lead to awards, and English language awards don't sit on the NFQ. So this is why QI has adopted a different approach for the QA of English language education. The codes of practice will be focusing on robust procedures to ensure that the learner is secure and protected, as we've been saying, and that the experience at a provider will be a positive one, will help them to develop their language skills effectively for work or study purposes. The QA guidelines for English language education need to be based on well-informed and academic research in the area. And for this reason, the QA for English language education course programs will be based on the Common European Framework of Reference, or the CEFR. I know many, if not most of you, already use the CEFR to describe your level system, and many of you use the CEFR framework to plan your syllabus, course programs, assessment and certificates. But we'd like to look at what more the CEFR can offer English language schools as a practical tool that can help in the development of your course programs to help meet your students' needs further. Work on the Common European Framework of Reference was started back in the 60s by the Council of Europe and has gradually developed into what is today an EU, and beyond the EU, a global reference tool in language instruction and assessment, with 40 languages currently described on the framework. It's used by writers, course and curriculum designers, universities and teacher education institutes. It's used for employment and migration purposes. It's anchored in law in France and Austria. So what's powerful about the CEFR is it helps us to focus on the empowerment of the autonomous learner who can take responsibility for their own learning process. With the can-do statements, which you're all familiar with, there is a move away from a negative perspective of, in inverted commas, the weak student at A1 level to a proficiency perspective of a can-do statement, for example, at each level. The framework can be seen as a tool to help you in the planning of curriculum, programs and exams by working backwards from what your learners need to be able to do in language, in the English language, in your case. So looking at this spectrum, which was designed by Peter Brown for the Council of Europe, the CEF4 is envisaged as a colour spectrum where one level blends into the next. As you know, learners may be more proficient in grammar or maybe more proficient in vocabulary and less in speaking typically. Following further updates to the CEF4, levels were further subdivided into, for example, A2.1 or B2+. So further defining the levels and further helping course designers to meet the needs of learners in their strengths and areas of development for each of the skills. New levels have also been defined by researchers, for example, pre-A1 or A0 for learners who've never been exposed to English, which is actually not quite common today, but we do have them, or who use a different alphabet, and we have a lot of those learners. And post C2 level, for example, high-level interpreters. So it's gone beyond A1 to C2. It's gone beyond that spectrum. We can now look further at how the CEF4 can help you when developing your course programs. It describes a total of 54 linguistic subskills for learners. So here I've selected some subskills which could be particularly useful for students preparing for higher education or for work. These subskills are divided into communicative activities, for example, addressing an audience, communicative strategies, for example, asking for clarification, and common language competences, for example, phonological control. If we look at, for example, a B1 learner, intermediate level, an example of a can-do statement for addressing audiences at B1 level is, for example, can give a prepared presentation outlining similarities and differences between countries. So this is more useful for a learner to know in terms of what they can do, rather than them saying, I've done the second conditional in my course book. So it really makes them more aware of what they can actually do in the language at a given level. So what are the advantages for you, the provider, in the use of the CEFR in the assessment of QA for English language? So, well, the CEFR is already in very widespread use in language centres in Ireland, so the preparation for the IEM will be less onerous, and it will add value as it will help you to develop further coherence in your programme design. This will help your teachers, as the programmes will be more relevant to their learner needs and therefore will make more sense to them. There'll be many resources which can be used by teachers. There are many resources which can be used by teachers to help them develop materials based around the sub-skills that their specific learners need. It will help you to enhance your offer, as you can use sample programs when you meet with agents or clients or when you're preparing for a tender. It's also how language centres are assessed by inspection schemes like ACILS and Equals, so it's something that many of you are used to. For the learner, a more in-depth focus on the CEFR will help to enhance their learning experience, as there will be more of a focus on their needs. A more tailored programme aligned to the CEFR will help learners to prepare for work or study, and their certificate with the CEFR level on it, along with can-do statements and of course the IEM, will be more valuable to them, as it will be more recognised internationally. The CEFR is a very powerful tool, but it's not currently used as extensively as it can be in language schools. It may be the case that a school that yourselves, you have a syllabus aligned to the CEFR, but that syllabus doesn't really have a real connection to what is actually being done in the classroom. So as part of the assessment, or part of the preparation for the assessment of QA, we're asking you to use the CEFR to align your syllabus to your course programs and to what your what your teachers do in the classroom. Your syllabus and course programs will be submitted as part of the assessment of your compliance with the codes of practice. There'll be a desk-based assessment of your syllabus and programs by a panel, and following this, there'll be a site visit where the panel members will assess your QA procedures and practice, including the QA of your programs. They'll observe lessons and assess the coherence of the syllabus, course program, and lessons materials used in class. So very similar to an inspection for those of you who are members of ACILS and Equals. However, providers will be asked to closely align your programs to the CEFR using detailed descriptors. And you will submit programs for the different courses that you offer. So, for example, general English, exam preparation, junior programs, etc. So we plan to have the draft codes completed by the end of April for English language education and for higher education. We'll begin stakeholder engagement with representatives from different types of language schools from around the country in May. During these stakeholder meetings with the representatives, we'll be getting feedback on the codes of practice and on the QA for ELE, so you will have a voice in the process. Following this, as Jim said, public consultation will begin in September, and you will be invited to submit your feedback on the codes of practice and QA. And once we have the final version ready, following consultation, information regarding the codes of practice and QA will be uploaded onto the QA website.